Introduction to Realism. Realism is one of the most significant and enduring traditions in the history of philosophy. At its core, realism asserts that there is a reality independent of our thoughts, perceptions, and language. This reality exists whether or not it is being perceived, and our task as human beings is to understand and engage with this reality as accurately as possible. Realism has played a crucial role in shaping philosophical thought across various domains, including metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, and science. It stands in contrast to idealism, which emphasizes the primacy of the mind or ideas over the external world. Instead, realists argue that the world has a structure and nature of its own, which can be known, albeit imperfectly, through human reason and empirical investigation. The roots of realism can be traced back to ancient Greek philosophy, particularly in the works of Plato and Aristotle. However, it has evolved over the centuries, adapting to new intellectual challenges and developments. Today, realism remains a vital and dynamic tradition, influencing contemporary debates in philosophy, science, politics, and other fields. This extensive examination of realism will explore its historical development, key figures, core concepts, and variations, as well as its impact on various disciplines and its critiques. Through this exploration, we aim to provide a comprehensive understanding of realism and its significance in the broader context of philosophical inquiry. Historical development of realism. The history of realism is a long and complex one, marked by significant debates and developments across different eras. While the term realism as a philosophical doctrine came into prominence in the modern period, its roots go much deeper, extending back to the philosophical inquiries of ancient Greece. 1. Ancient roots. Plato and Aristotle. In ancient Greece, realism found its early expression in the works of Plato and Aristotle, although their approaches were distinct. Plato's theory of forms posited that there exists a higher realm of abstract, eternal forms or ideas, which are more real than the material world we perceive. Although this might seem to align with idealism, Plato was a realist in the sense that he believed in the objective existence of these forms. Aristotle, Plato's student, offered a different perspective that would more directly influence the development of realism. Aristotle rejected the existence of separate forms and instead argued that the reality we experience is composed of substances, entities that exist independently and possess both form and matter. For Aristotle, knowledge comes from understanding these substances and their properties, not from contemplating a separate realm of abstract forms. 2. Medieval realism. Scholasticism and the realist-nominalist debate. In the medieval period, realism was central to the debates among scholastic philosophers. The most prominent form of realism during this time was scholastic realism, which was concerned with the nature of universals, abstract concepts such as redness or humanness. The realist-nominalist debate was a key issue in this period. Realists, such as Thomas Aquinas, argued that universals have real existence, either as entities in the mind of God or as properties inherent in objects themselves. Nominalists, on the other hand, claimed that universals are merely names or labels we use to group similar objects, without any independent existence. This debate had profound implications for theology, metaphysics, and epistemology, influencing how philosophers understood the relationship between language, thought, and reality. 3. Modern realism. The rise of empiricism and scientific inquiry. The modern period saw the emergence of new forms of realism, shaped by the rise of empirical science and the works of philosophers such as John Locke, David Hume, and Immanuel Kant. John Locke, often regarded as the father of modern empiricism, advocated for a form of realism grounded in sensory experience. Locke argued that while our knowledge of the external world comes through our senses, the objects of this world exist independently of our perceptions. His distinction between primary and secondary qualities, where primary qualities, such as shape and motion, are inherent in objects, and secondary qualities, such as color and taste, are dependent on the observer, became a cornerstone of modern realist thought. David Hume, although often seen as a skeptic, contributed to the development of realism by emphasizing the importance of empirical observation and the limitations of human reason. His analysis of causation and his challenge to metaphysical speculations pushed philosophers to ground their theories in observable phenomena. Immanuel Kant, while not a traditional realist, introduced the concept of transcendental realism, in which the external world, the noumenon, exists independently of our perception, though we can never know it directly. Kant's work influenced subsequent debates on the nature of reality and perception, laying the groundwork for later realist movements. 4. Contemporary realism, responses to idealism and pragmatism. The 20th century witnessed a resurgence of realism, particularly in response to the challenges posed by idealism and pragmatism. Philosophers such as G. E. Moore and Bertrand Russell championed a return to realism, arguing against the subjectivity of idealism and the relativism of pragmatism. G. E. Moore's famous Refutation of Idealism and his emphasis on the common-sense reality of the external world were pivotal in establishing what is now known as analytic realism. Bertrand Russell, a contemporary of Moore, also defended realism, particularly in his work on the philosophy of language and logic, where he sought to ground meaning in reference to a mind-independent reality. In the latter half of the 20th century, debates between realists and anti-realists, such as logical positivists and postmodernists, continued to shape philosophical discourse. The rise of scientific realism, which asserts that scientific theories describe a reality independent of human beliefs and perceptions, became a major force in contemporary philosophy of science. Key figures in realism. The evolution of realism has been shaped by numerous philosophers, each contributing to the tradition in significant ways. The following sections will provide an overview of some of the most influential figures in realist thought, from its ancient origins to its contemporary forms. 1. Plato and Aristotle. Overview of Plato's theory of forms and its realist implications, Aristotle's critique of Plato and his development of substance theory. 2. Thomas Aquinas, scholastic realism and the synthesis of Aristotelian philosophy with Christian theology, Aquinas' views on universals and their existence in the mind of God. 3. John Locke, empirical realism and the distinction between primary and secondary qualities, Locke's influence on modern realist thought and epistemology. 4. David Hume, Hume's empirical skepticism and its impact on realist theories of causation and knowledge, the role of habit and custom in Hume's understanding of reality. 5. G. E. Moore, the refutation of idealism, and the defense of common-sense realism, Moore's influence on analytic philosophy and his arguments for a mind-independent reality. 6. Bertrand Russell, Russell's contributions to the philosophy of language and logic, his defense of realism in the face of idealist and pragmatist critique. 7. Hilary Putnam. Hilary Putnam is a significant figure in the 20th century philosophy, known for his work in philosophy of mind, language, and science. Putnam initially supported a form of scientific realism, which holds that the world described by science is the real world. However, he later developed what he called internal realism, a more nuanced view that attempts to bridge the gap between metaphysical realism and anti-realism. In this view, reality is not independent of our conceptual schemes, but there is still a fact of the matter about what is true within a given framework. His famous thought experiment, the brain in a vat, was used to challenge radical skepticism and reinforce a form of realism that recognizes the role of human cognition in shaping our understanding of reality. 8. Saul Kripke. Saul Kripke's work in modal logic and the philosophy of language has significantly impacted contemporary realism. In his book, Naming and Necessity, Kripke argues against descriptivist theories of reference, proposing instead that names rigidly designate objects across possible worlds. This argument supports a form of realism about possible worlds, where certain truths about the world are necessary and independent of human beliefs. Kripke's essentialism regarding natural kinds, such as species or chemical elements, also contributes to a realist understanding of the world. 9. Charles Sanders Peirce, often considered the father of pragmatism, Charles Sanders Peirce also had significant realist commitments. Peirce's pragmatism is deeply intertwined with a scientific realism that emphasizes the idea that our understanding of the world converges over time toward the truth, which exists independently of human thought. His concept of the final opinion suggests that reality is what we would all agree upon if we had infinite time and perfect knowledge. This notion reinforces a realist perspective within the framework of fallibilism, acknowledging that while our knowledge is always subject to revision, there is still an objective reality that we are progressively uncovering.
John Searle's work on the philosophy of mind, language, and social reality emphasizes the distinction between objective and subjective reality. In his construction of social reality, Searle argues that while certain aspects of reality are dependent on human institutions, like money or governments, there are brute facts about the world that exist independently of any human institutions or perceptions. His defense of direct realism in the philosophy of mind, that we perceive the world directly as it is, rather than through a veil of sense data, offers a strong argument against more skeptical or idealist positions. W.V.O. Quine is known for his critique of the analytic-synthetic distinction and his advocacy for a naturalized epistemology, which grounds knowledge in empirical science. Although Quine rejected traditional metaphysical realism, his insistence that our best theories are those that fit with our empirical observations aligns him with a form of scientific realism. Quine's rejection of a clear divide between language and the world supports a holistic form of realism, where our theories about the world are interconnected and must be judged as a whole. Realism is not a monolithic doctrine, but rather a family of related views that share a commitment to the existence of a mind-independent reality. Here, we explore the major variations of realism and the core concepts that define them. Metaphysical realism asserts that the world exists independently of our thoughts, beliefs, or perceptions. This form of realism is concerned with the nature of existence and the fundamental structure of reality. It posits that objects and properties exist whether or not they are observed, and that truths about the world are objective. Metaphysical realism is opposed to various forms of idealism, which argue that reality is in some way dependent on the mind. Epistemological realism, often associated with the common sense view, holds that we can have knowledge of the world as it really is. This form of realism asserts that our perceptions and theories, though fallible, generally correspond to the way things are. Epistemological realism is often contrasted with skepticism and relativism, which question whether we can know the world as it truly is. This form of realism is central to scientific inquiry, where the goal is to discover objective truths about the natural world. Scientific realism is the view that the entities postulated by our best scientific theories, such as electrons, black holes, and genes, exist independently of our knowledge of them. Scientific realists argue that the success of science in explaining and predicting phenomena provides strong evidence that our theories are, at least approximately, true. Scientific realism faces challenges from anti-realist positions such as instrumentalism and constructive empiricism, which suggest that scientific theories are merely useful tools for organizing observations, rather than true descriptions of the world. Moral realism is the position that moral facts exist independently of human beliefs or attitudes. Moral realists argue that statements like killing is wrong are objectively true, regardless of cultural or individual opinions. This view is contrasted with moral relativism, which holds that moral truths are dependent on cultural or individual perspectives, and with moral anti-realism, which denies the existence of objective moral facts altogether. Moral realism has implications for ethics, law, and social policy, as it suggests that there are universal standards of right and wrong. Aesthetic realism is the view that there are objective truths about beauty and artistic value. According to aesthetic realists, certain works of art are objectively better or more beautiful than others, and these judgments are not merely matters of personal taste. This view is opposed to aesthetic subjectivism, which holds that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Aesthetic realism has been influential in art criticism and the philosophy of art, where it has been used to defend the idea that some artistic judgments are more valid than others. Political realism is a theory in international relations that emphasizes the competitive and conflictual nature of international politics. Political realists argue that states act primarily in their own self-interest, and that power is the primary currency in international relations. This view contrasts with idealist theories that emphasize cooperation, international law, and moral considerations in global politics. Political realism has been influential in the development of foreign policy, particularly during the Cold War, where it was used to justify the balance of power and deterrence strategies. Realism's influence extends beyond philosophy into various other fields, each adopting and adapting realist principles to suit its own context. In literature and art, realism refers to a style that aims to depict everyday life and ordinary people with fidelity and accuracy. This movement emerged in the mid-19th century as a reaction against Romanticism, which often idealized or exaggerated reality. Literary realism is characterized by detailed, unembellished descriptions of the world, complex characters, and a focus on social issues. Notable authors associated with literary realism include Gustave Flaubert, Leo Tolstoy, and George Eliot. In art, realism is exemplified by painters such as Gustave Courbet and Jean-François Millet, who depicted rural and working-class life with stark realism. Realism in international relations is a dominant theoretical approach that views states as the primary actors in an anarchic international system. Realists believe that states are driven by the pursuit of power and security, and that conflict is an inevitable aspect of international relations. Key concepts in realist theory include the balance of power, the security dilemma, and the notion of national interest. Prominent realist thinkers include Hans Morgenthau, Kenneth Waltz, and John Mearsheimer. Realism has shaped major foreign policy decisions, including those related to war, diplomacy, and alliances. In psychology and cognitive sciences, realism manifests in theories that argue for the existence of a mind-independent world that can be studied and understood through empirical research. Realist approaches in these fields often emphasize the role of the brain and nervous system in shaping perception, cognition, and behavior. Cognitive realism, for example, posits that cognitive processes reflect the structure of the external world and are not merely subjective constructs. This perspective is central to fields such as cognitive neuroscience, where the goal is to map the relationship between mental states and brain activity. While realism has been a dominant force in many areas of philosophy and other disciplines, it has also faced significant criticism from various quarters. Idealists challenge the realist assertion that a mind-independent world exists. They argue that reality is constructed by the mind, and that what we perceive as the external world is shaped by our mental structures and processes. Philosophers such as George Berkeley and Immanuel Kant have been central to this critique. Berkeley's immaterialism posits that objects only exist when they are perceived, while Kant's transcendental idealism argues that our knowledge is limited to phenomena, things as they appear to us, rather than noumena, things as they are in themselves.
Postmodernism offers a radical critique of realism by questioning the very notion of objective reality. Postmodernists argue that what we consider reality is a construct of language, culture, and power relations. Philosophers like Michel Foucault and Jean-François Lyotard suggest that truth is not an absolute, but rather a product of discursive practices that serve particular interests. This critique challenges the realist assumption that reality is independent of our representations and asserts that all knowledge is contingent, context-dependent, and subject to change. Anti-realism encompasses a variety of positions that oppose the central tenets of realism. For instance, logical positivists like A.J. Ayer and the Vienna Circle argued that statements about the external world are only meaningful if they can be empirically verified, thereby challenging the realist claim that we can have knowledge of a mind-independent reality. In the philosophy of science, figures like Thomas Kuhn and Paul Feyerabend argued that scientific paradigms are incommensurable and that scientific progress is not a straightforward accumulation of objective knowledge but a series of paradigm shifts driven by socio-cultural factors. Realism has had a profound and lasting impact on various domains of modern thought, shaping the development of philosophy, science, politics, and literature. Realism has been a cornerstone of analytic philosophy, particularly in the areas of metaphysics, epistemology, and philosophy of language. Analytic philosophers have sought to clarify and defend realist positions through rigorous analysis and argumentation. G. E. Moore's defense of common-sense realism, Bertrand Russell's work on logical atomism, and Saul Kripke's theories of reference are all examples of how realism has been central to the analytic tradition. The debates between realists and anti-realists have been a major focus of contemporary philosophy. These debates span a range of issues, including the nature of truth, the existence of abstract entities, and the interpretation of scientific theories. Realists argue that truth is a correspondence between statements and the external world, while anti-realists, such as proponents of constructivism and relativism, contend that truth is relative to conceptual schemes or social contexts. These debates continue to shape philosophical discussions on the nature of reality and our knowledge of it. Scientific realism has played a crucial role in the development of modern science, underpinning the belief that scientific theories provide accurate descriptions of the natural world. This belief has driven the progress of scientific inquiry, leading to groundbreaking discoveries in fields such as physics, biology, and chemistry. In ethics, moral realism has influenced debates on moral objectivity and the existence of universal moral principles. Moral realists argue that certain actions are objectively right or wrong, regardless of cultural or individual beliefs, and this position has implications for global human rights, legal systems, and social justice. To illustrate the application of realism in various fields, we can examine several case studies that highlight how realist principles have been employed in scientific inquiry, political theory, and literature. A case study on the development of scientific theories, such as the theory of evolution or quantum mechanics, can demonstrate how scientific realism operates in practice. Scientific realists argue that these theories are not just useful tools for organizing observations but are actually true descriptions of the underlying structure of the natural world. The success of these theories in explaining and predicting phenomena is seen as evidence of their truth, supporting the realist claim that science progressively uncovers the objective reality of the universe. Realpolitik, a term often associated with 19th-century political practice, exemplifies political realism in action. A case study on figures like Otto von Bismarck, who applied Realpolitik principles in their statecraft, can show how political realism prioritizes power, national interest, and pragmatic considerations over ideological commitments. This case study can explore how Realpolitik shaped the unification of Germany and the balance of power in Europe, illustrating the practical implications of political realism. Realism in literature can be examined through a case study of 19th-century novelists such as Charles Dickens, Leo Tolstoy, and Gustave Flaubert. These authors sought to depict everyday life and social issues with a high degree of fidelity, rejecting the idealization and romanticism of earlier literary movements. By focusing on the lives of ordinary people and the complexities of social and economic conditions, these novelists used literary realism to explore themes of class, morality, and human experience. This case study can analyze specific works, such as Dickens' Hard Times or Tolstoy's Anna Karenina, to illustrate how literary realism conveys the realities of the human condition. In conclusion, realism is a diverse and influential tradition that has shaped the development of philosophy, science, politics, and literature. By asserting the existence of a mind-independent reality, realism offers a framework for understanding the world that emphasizes objectivity, empirical investigation, and the pursuit of truth. Despite facing significant critiques from idealists, pragmatists, postmodernists, and anti-realists, realism remains a vital and dynamic approach to understanding the nature of reality. As we have seen, realism is not a single doctrine but a family of related views that share a commitment to the existence of an external world independent of our thoughts and perceptions. From metaphysical realism to scientific realism, from moral realism to political realism, the various forms of realism offer different perspectives on how we can know and engage with reality. Realism continues to be a central topic of philosophical inquiry, influencing debates on the nature of truth, the interpretation of scientific theories, and the foundations of ethics. By examining the historical development, key figures, core concepts, variations, and critiques of realism, we gain a deeper understanding of its enduring significance in the history of thought. Whether in the context of philosophical analysis, scientific investigation, or artistic expression, realism provides a robust framework for exploring the complexities of the world and our place within it. As we continue to grapple with the challenges of understanding reality, realism offers a valuable perspective that emphasizes the importance of objectivity, empirical inquiry, and the pursuit of truth in our quest to make sense of the world.